and it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to the third in a series of 4 artist conversations with artists in the SAMA collection as part of Contemporary Art Month. I want to begin by asking you, if you have not already done so, to please turn off your cell phone. And I also want to mention that, as with the other conversations, we are videotaping the program. So if we go over an hour, there will be a moment where I will be signaled to pause while we change the tape, because we don't want to lose any of the conversation. I also want to express, on behalf of the museum, gratitude to Peter and Juliana Holt and the Holt Foundation for generously sponsoring the reinstallation of the Contemporary Galleries and this program of conversations. And I want to remind everyone that next week, the final conversation will be at the same time, Tuesday night, with Rolando Briseño. So, I guess if we could, oh no, we don't need to close the house lights yet, I guess. Let me begin by introducing Constance Lowe, who is our guest tonight. Constance, or Connie as we know her, is Associate Professor of Art and Art History at UT San Antonio. And in recent years, she has had major solo exhibitions at the Phoenix Art Museum, at the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, and at the Galveston Art Center. And as I've done with the other conversations, I'd like to begin by going a little bit back in time. Where did you grow up, Connie? Where are you from?
I grew up in St. Louis.
St. Louis, yeah. Okay. And was there any art inspiration or in your upbringing? Tell us about that.
Well, there was a lot. My mother taught me to draw at a really early age in that kind of conventional way, starting with elemental forms and building on the forms and the way that we teach drawing now. And I also took Saturday classes at the St. Louis Art Museum, which is an institution that I still visit frequently. And those classes really consisted of being given a reproduction of a painting and turned loose in the museum to run and find it. And then you'd find it and you'd sit down with those big fat crayons and draw something that kind of
Were there any particular paintings that really impressed you hugely at that time?
At that time, I don't remember any. I was trying to think about that, but I do know that what I was really struck by, and probably continue to be struck by, were the Northern European paintings, the 17th century British and French portraiture, things that involved a lot of detail, a lot of fabric description, material description and objects. Depictions of fabric, the illusion of fabric and lace, objects. I was never very interested in the figure, the human element of it. I was much more interested in the objects that surrounded it, and the materials that surrounded it.
And so did you sort of decide very early on that you would pursue art?
I decided that I would pursue it. I didn't really know what being an artist meant, and I didn't think I was going to be an artist per se. I mean, I didn't think one way or the other about it, but I did know that that was something I wanted to make. And I spent a lot of time as a kid looking through the P volume of the World Book Encyclopedia, looking at paintings. That was really my first introduction to some of the major historical works that we know of.
So after you graduated from high school and it was time to go to college, were you certain yet that you would? No.
No, I knew that that art was something I wanted to make. But I really didn't know what I wanted to pursue.
But you enrolled at Southern Methodist University.
I actually enrolled at a small college called Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida for my freshman year.
I see.
Which I don't put on my bio because it's inconsequential. But, and then I transferred to SMU because I knew some people who were going there, and I thought I wanted to pursue art education. And that lasted for about a semester. But I didn't know really what I wanted to do, but there was no definition in my environment about being an artist. An artist is a person who does this or does that. That didn't exist for me. So I always knew it would be something I would do, but it really wasn't until I went to graduate school.
But you did get a BFA.
I got a BFA in both painting and graphic design. And my interest in graphic design was not, I think, the usual one where you go into it as a way of being in an art-related position to make money. I was really attracted to the ordering of things that it involved, and also to the creative problem solving that it involved. And so I was really attracted to it, and I was more attracted to it as something related to art making than I was to it as a job. I didn't pursue it for very long after that, and then I went to graduate school.
Okay, so graduate school took you to Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo. Why did you choose that school?
They offered me an assistantship I was actually having a conversation today with somebody about the choices that we'd made, and it was fine, but it wasn't very rigorous. And I chose it because I didn't really know. I mean, the offer was good, and it offered me an opportunity to teach, and and that was really where I became much more aware of what the practice of an artist is and how to sustain it, and the intellectual dimension of being a
So after you
art
got your MFA, did you set up a studio somewhere?
I actually got a teaching job, temporary teaching job in Champaign, Illinois, right out of graduate school, and kind of was a bit nomadic for a few years. So my studios were always...
Was it more or less the going to CAA and like everybody trying to find the job with a lot of other
a little bit,
competitors?
yeah. Yeah.
And these were short-term appointments?
At first, that's pretty much how it frequently happens.
Okay, so when did you sort of arrive at some place where you thought, this is where I'm going to stay for a while?
It was when I arrived in Minneapolis.
Okay,
so I was
and
there for 8
then
years.
you went back to school while you were there?
I did. As I was mentioning before, when I was in graduate school, I became much more aware of the possibility of an intellectual dimension to art making and art practice, and that really attracted me, and I think it's what solidified my desire to actually be an artist. So for a short period of time, then I took some extension courses in culture theory and criticism that I think really informed my practice and gave me a better sense of the bigger picture.
Did you come away with any specific viewpoint, critical viewpoint at that point? Was there anything you championed or saw, direction you were going to follow that came out of that?
Not particularly, because I didn't go deeply enough into it, but I think it certainly introduced me to some postmodern theory that relates very much, that I found relevant to what I already thought about my work, in terms of uncertainty and, what would be the right word, kind of elusiveness.
Well, let's speaking of your work, let's take a look at, let's turn down the house lights so we can see a little more clearly here. So where were you living now? This is a couple of years after.
This is Minnesota.
You're still in Minnesota. And we're looking at a diptych, scent and memory, mixed media with objects. So let's first talk about the materials, because we don't know evidently what they are.
Well, I want to describe it a little bit more, because it's a very old slide, and it doesn't read as well as I'd like now that it's been digitized. But it's actually a fairly large painting. It's about 4 by 6 feet of oil on masonite, and are
they two separate panels?
They're attached. So
Right.
you can't take them apart.
Right.
And there's two nameplates, if you will, that are illusionistic. They're painted as if the text was carved in stone that says "sent" on the left and "memory" on the right. And that's difficult to see in this
I
image,
see them
which
now,
is
yes,
the hard
towards
part.
the top.
Right. And then the objects are these wrought iron sconces with vessels in them that have just these kind of unidentified substances in them. It's just stuff that gives a kind of visceral sense. And I was really interested, maybe this is the first time, and we'll see it through several different works, but interested in having something attached to a painting, which is a static thing that might change and mold and dry out.
And what about the depicted imagery? Is that a beehive, honeycomb?
It's a beehive on a honeycomb on the left, and an X-ray of, I think, an esophagus or thorax on the right, the human body on the right. And what I was doing at this time, and I think, again, it'll continue through so many of the images that we're going to see, is creating a play between the pictorial and the actual, between the illusionistic and the painted surface, between the recognizable and the unrecognizable in terms of the images, in terms of the invented versus the found, those kind of dichotomies.
So yes, dualities.
Dualities.
Okay. So then we move a couple years later. You're still in Minnesota, right? Okay. And were you exhibiting by this time?
Yes, I was. I was in a show. I'd done a show at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and a show, let's see, at ARC in Chicago, and then a few other smaller things around it. A number of solo shows at some of the local university goes.
And you were teaching as well, right?
Oh, yes, I was teaching at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and the University of Minnesota, both as adjunct
Oh, okay.
at time.
Okay, so tell us what we're looking at here. There's a painting and then objects.
This painting, a lot of what I would say about this painting is similar to what I said about the previous one. Again, it's oil on masonite, accompanied by objects. But the image, there's a little history to this image, which it's from a found photograph that was a 2-page spread, and I've only used half of it, of this Eastern European man who had lost a leg at some point in some conflict. And this was his entire room. He lived in this room and with his table and all these books, and then his bed and his artificial leg and jars of things, preserved foods. And again, as I was saying earlier, all my attraction is always to the kind of peripheral things around the figure. And I was really interested in these stacks and stacks of books and the kind of hidden language that they might imply. And then the plinth underneath is just a steel plinth with those little rawhide dog shoes, not shoes, but they're shoes that are dog shoes. Those little moccasins that they make that I had never seen before at that time.
Where did you find them?
Oh, at the pet store, I guess.
Uh-huh. They're actually dog shoes.
They're little moccasins that are made out of rawhide. I haven't seen them here, so I don't know. Maybe they don't make them anymore. But I was really interested in the use of this animal product to make this thing that another animal was going to chew as recreation, and to the character of the object, which was both a shoe and not a shoe. They weren't.
And how do you feel that? How do they relate to the depicted imagery in the painting?
They do not relate in any kind of literal way, and I've always been very interested in creating these kind of mysterious juxtapositions, things that I don't quite know, or that suggest possible relationships that aren't the obvious or literal ones. So my knowledge of the entire photograph, which isn't seen in the painting, of the one-legged war veteran and the kind of absence and yet still real material presence of the human in that image is the only way I can really relate the shoes to it in any kind of obvious kind of way. Then what is maybe a little different.
So there's a deliberate ambiguity, is that
There's a
what you're
deliberate ambiguity, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And from the perspective of the viewer, is that something you want the viewer then to?
Yes.
And why is that? Why is that important?
I think that kind of deliberate ambiguity or mystery, if you want to call it that, or the uncertainty, unspecificness of those relationships opens up, expands the possibility of engaging not only with the work but with your own thought process. So that I'm not interested as an artist in telling you or telling a viewer something specific. I'm interested in creating a situation.
Okay.
And I'm also interested in calling attention to the way we think, to operations among things. So as your brain processes the different elements, you become aware of how those operations take place.
Do you find that sometimes creates difficulty with the sort of broader general public that's not familiar with contemporary art language? Do they have difficulty with something like this?
They might. I don't usually have an opportunity to find that out. So I do certainly have had people ask me questions about that, but it's not something that I dwell on.
Okay. Well, we at museums, I guess, try to do what we can with labels to help them along. Okay. This one related certainly in terms of depicted imagery and objects and staging. Why the cross image in this one?
I was interested in it as a kind of marker, and I also wanted, as I was moving from those more representational paintings, keeping a lot of the same elements, I wanted to work more emblematically and abstractly. So it's just kind of a marker, and it can certainly imply all of the things that can imply as a red cross or as a landing site or whatever, but it's really more of an abstract, non-objective motif.
Now, is this the first time you're using food substances as a material?
It is, and this is the jar on the right has a pickled egg in it, which was something I wasn't familiar with until I moved to Minnesota, but they would sell these huge jars of peeled and pickled eggs that were these amazing forms because they were so rubbery and both very artificial and organic at the same time. And then on the left is a piece of molding bread.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned before, I was really interested in having an element that would change through the life of the piece.
And that would be the bread as it sort of deteriorates?
Right, and mold both blooms and decays at the same time.
Now, were you aware of other artists using food at the time? Donald Lipsky, for example?
Lipsky a little bit, and as a bit younger artist than I was in 1991, I was really influenced by artists such as Janos Kounelis and Beuys, artists who used
certainly the lard with Beuys.
The lard and the honey.
Right.
And who really used materials for both their physical and psychological potential. And that was kind of my first introduction to that possibility through artists like that.
Well, that's good reasons.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right, here we are with the work that's in our collection. So I know there's a lot of, there's both personal and sort of non-personal associations that you have with this work. So why don't you tell us about that?
Okay. One thing that you are seeing in this in the move from the last painting or piece that we looked at to this is the time that I relocated to San Antonio, and that kind of disruption always makes a change in my work when I make a move, because you have these periods of time when you can't work and you reorder your studio and you rethink things. And for the first time, I was also in a permanent university situation. The university made it possible for me to have some money through a grant that allowed me to have some things made that I had envisioned but not had the ability to construct myself. And what I wanted to see was the things that I had been using in my work, images that I had invented or found to be used in my work. And then I've did some work that we haven't seen here that had representational but also invented images in it.
What kind of invented images?
Cones and half animal, half architectural forms.
Okay.
A lot of boxes, things similar to the box in this piece.
Right.
And so I really wanted to have those images